Sara and I met in college when we were kids. She was an extremely authentic, warm, kind person with a very laid-back disposition, just a delightful nature. She was also extremely bright and very funny, tremendous mom and wife. She was a very healthy person, a very fit person, but shockingly we discovered Sara had gastric cancer.
I do remember a flurry of emails asking me to see Sara, and when I met her, she's just absolutely lovely person, a young woman with a devoted husband and young kids, and a bad cancer. We had hoped that she might have disease that could be removed, but sure enough, when they went in to do the surgery, they did in fact find cancer that had already spread.
You know, no one's prepared for that. There's no earthquake kit. Your whole world changes on a dime. We started treatment as quickly as possible.
Sara and Jeff are not unlike many other patients I've cared for who took that news, processed it, shed some tears, and then decided, okay, so what do we have to do about it?
Chemotherapy is not a long-term answer for the situation we were in. We were doing a lot of research to try to figure out something long-term.
My first contact with Jeff was a long phone call that we had to talk about Sara and his worries about her at the very beginning of her diagnosis. Jeff was passionate and motivated about learning about cancer and about stomach cancer in particular, and really trying to push the envelope about new experimental therapies. So I was impressed with his knowledge and his really fierce desire to help Sara.
I think Jeff had an even keel in exploring different options and evaluating those options, and always having sort of the positive bent that research is valuable, learning is valuable, and if it helps my wife, that's what I want more than anything. But if it doesn't help somebody else, it's all good.
It seemed to us through research we were doing that the most hopeful things that existed in the world of cancer treatment couldn't be accessed by gastric cancer patients. And that's really what got us thinking about trying to launch a trial to try to liberate some of these incredibly hopeful medicines that were out there being used in other diseases.
So Jeff and I had a discussion about various clinical research ideas, various drugs that were looking promising, and we came upon two. We talked a little bit about how we might combine those two drugs for patients like Sara, and we started that process.
Jeff had been mobilizing his network and had an idea around a trial for stomach cancer that used immunotherapy. This actually involved having conversations with two different companies.
And Insight and Merck connected, and they both agreed in principle to the idea of donating drugs for a gastric cancer trial that was extremely, I'm sure as you can understand, extremely hopeful and exciting to us.
I really value Jeff for initially bringing this idea and bringing the players together. And then it was up to the team at Stanford to help bring that to completion. My role in the clinical trial is as the principal investigator. So I am the lead and in charge of developing the clinical trial, designing the trial, and implementing it and taking care of patients on the trial.
So there are several types of clinical trials. Some are developed by the pharmaceutical company. The one that we're very interested in are investigator-initiated trials. And those are trials when a member of the faculty or a clinical researcher decides that they have a good idea. So that type of trial, which we think is the most important actually in getting new ideas into the clinical trial arena, that type requires several sources of funding usually.
The pharmaceutical companies were graciously willing to donate the medicines, but they weren't paying for the trial. It needed to be funded privately.
Oftentimes breast, colon, prostate, lung are the first ones to be tested with a new drug. But there's a big gap, and the big gap is looking at the small 10, 15, 20 patient trials that can give a proof of principle.
As government funding and industry funding becomes tighter, it becomes critical for us to find other ways to fund clinical research.
Philanthropy is probably the most critical piece of clinical trials, for specific trials, but also in general, because the infrastructure also requires funding. The coordinators, the data managers, the people doing the budget, the safety people, the regulatory people. It takes a village really to carry out a number of clinical trials at the same time.
The people that I reached out to were incredibly, inspirationally willing to help.
Jeff was, of course, devoted to turning over each and every stone he could find that might have some possible treatment that would provide benefit, and which we had hoped we would be able to keep Sara well. But there comes a time where thinking about future trials is not a realistic expectation.
My wife was a very wise person. As always, she made her own choices, called her own shots, and she felt at one point that it was time to stop. Time is precious. Time to enjoy a nice summer at home. She was a lot more rational about all this than I was. And she knew, and she was right.
I'd like to think, in all the work that we do now on gastric cancer, that we honor Sara's memory with that work. Now, not all of our work will be successful, but it'll make an incremental gain and maybe someday a big gain in a tough disease.
This combination of immunotherapy agents holds a lot of promise for this particular patient population. And though it's a small study, what I think Stanford really hopes to contribute is a lot of the basic biology or basic science information that we'll learn from this.
Without clinical trials, I think we would be at a static point in our ability to care for patients. Clinical trials are what really enable us to push the field forward to do better than we're doing now. And that's why we're all here. We want to be able to treat patients better in the future than we can at present.
Extremely hopeful, as was Sara, that this could really be a game changer for someone. Stanford put their arms around us. For us to give back, I think, is the kind of legacy I would want for Sara. And knowing that this trial is largely opening because of her, it means the world to me. It gave her a tremendous amount of peace to think that something we worked on together might help someone else.